In today's comparison video, we have our 2019 long-term RAV4 Hybrid over here, and this very red vehicle is the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross for 2020. Now, on the surface of things, it may seem a little bit odd to compare an Eclipse Cross to a Toyota RAV4 because some folks out there have been describing the Eclipse Cross as a subcompact crossover. But this is about the same size overall as a Hyundai Tucson, so that means it definitely is in the compact crossover segment. Mitsubishi's lineup is full of tweener vehicles. We have the Outlander, which is a 2-row or 3-row vehicle, longer than this right here. Then we have the Eclipse Cross, which is a little bit shorter than the RAV4. And then we have the Outlander Sport, which is definitely the CHR competitor. In addition to that, the two vehicles right in front of us in red and in blue are almost exactly the same price at around $33,000. In addition to the Eclipse Cross being a little bit shorter in terms of overall length, it's also a little bit narrower in width. This is 71 inches wide versus 73.4 over here for the RAV4. That does mean that we have a little bit less space on the inside. Up front, both of these models have LED headlamps. They're optional on the Mitsubishi, standard over here in the RAV4. But again, the Mitsubishi is a little bit less expensive. So in comparably priced vehicles, you will likely find similar features over here in the Mitsubishi. When it comes to overall looks, I have to say that I like the front end look of the Mitsubishi overall. The Eclipse Cross is definitely trying to be a very style-forward crossover, and you'll really see that when we move to the back. Meanwhile, the RAV4 over here is not my favorite in this segment, but this is significantly better looking than the last generation RAV4. These two models are pretty similarly equipped when it comes to active safety. They both have adaptive cruise control, they both have pedestrian detection, autonomous braking, lane keeping assistance, etc. But all those systems are optional on the Mitsubishi, and they're standard on the Toyota for 2019 and 2020. Toyota has been very aggressive lately at bringing all of their latest active safety technologies to just about every vehicle in their lineup, including base trims. But remember that the RAV4 is going to be more expensive than a base Mitsubishi. So by the time you've equipped them, as we see here, about $32,000 to $33,000 for either of these options, you're going to get essentially the same safety systems. And we'll get a little bit more actually on the Mitsubishi because this does have the 360-degree camera on this model and a heads-up display. The 360-degree camera is available on the RAV4, but not for the price that we're looking at here, and a heads-up display is not available at all. At 175.5 inches long, the Eclipse Cross is on the very smallest end of the compact crossover segment. But this is only 0.7 of an inch shorter than a Hyundai Tucson. On the other hand, it is a significant 5 inches shorter than the RAV4, and that really is obvious on the inside, where the RAV4 has more room between the dashboard and the rear cargo area. From the side profile, you can see the other big difference between the RAV4 and the Eclipse Cross. Back here, we have a slightly squarer rear end design, whereas the Eclipse Cross was designed to be a very style-forward crossover. Mitsubishi was pretty upfront with that when they were releasing this vehicle, that they decided to try and make this have a little bit of coupe-like styling, perhaps something like a mainstream BMW X4 or X6. And that's why the roofline really starts to plunge right around here. Now, the downside to that is that we get less rear seat headroom and less cargo room as a result in the Eclipse Cross. An example of the styling in the Mitsubishi are these more attractive wheels up front and the fact that we have a lot of chrome going on the front end as well. I have to say, I'm a little bit of a sucker for chrome. Ground clearance is pretty similar between these two models. We have 7.9 inches of clearance in the Eclipse Cross, 8.1 inches of clearance in the RAV4 Hybrid. That bumps up to 8.4 inches maximum if you get the RAV4 Adventure. When it comes to rear end style, these two vehicles strike me as pretty similar. In fact, I think that the same person could almost have designed both of them. We have tail lamp modules that definitely stick out from the body quite a lot. The Eclipse Cross has this dramatic piece of plastic that runs all the way across the rear hatch. No visible exhaust tips over here in the Mitsubishi. Well, we have twin exhaust tips that are visible in all models of the RAV4, including the Hybrid. Both these vehicles have combination tail lamp modules, so elements are LEDs and some of the elements are halogen as well. Both have amber turn signals right there, as you can see. Under these hoods, the engine lineups couldn't be any different. We have a 1.5-liter turbocharged engine over here in the Eclipse Cross. It is the only engine available in America. It produces notably less horsepower than we find in something like a Honda CR-V with its 1.5-liter turbo, however. 152 horsepower, 184 pound-feet of torque. Power is routed to the front wheels or all four wheels via a continuously variable automatic transmission, and fuel economy ranges from 25 to 27 miles per gallon. Over here in the RAV4, we have an all 2.5-liter naturally aspirated engine lineup. The base engine produces 203 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. same amount of torque we find under this hood, but notably more power. It's also mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission, not a CVT. So if you like the way a traditional automatic transmission feels, you're definitely going to want to go for the Toyota. The engine we have in this particular model is the optional hybrid system that bumps power up to 219 horsepower out of the same basic 2.5-liter design and bumps fuel economy up to 40 miles per gallon. The least efficient version of the RAV4 is going to be the all-wheel drive model. That gets 28 miles per gallon, notably higher than the all-wheel drive Eclipse Cross. Some of that has to do with Toyota's new engine design, which is very, very efficient, and the 8-speed automatic transmission, but some of that also has to do with the all-wheel drive system that we find in the Eclipse Cross. It seems to be a little bit more eager to connect the rear axle, giving you slightly better traction in some adverse conditions. When it comes to towing, both of these models start in a very similar place, 1,500 pounds, but that's where the Eclipse Cross ends. All models tow 1,500 pounds. The RAV4 over here will tow up to 3,000 pounds depending on how you have it equipped, 1,750 pounds if you get the hybrid model. When it comes to front seat comfort, I found the seats in the Eclipse Cross to be a little bit more comfortable than the ones that are in our long-term RAV4, mainly because the seat bottom cushion is a little bit longer in here and the seat cushion is a little bit softer. Now you should keep in mind that this power seat is not as adjustable as what we find in the RAV4. There's no adjustable lumbar support in the Eclipse Cross at all. Both vehicles have tilt telescopic steering columns, but the RAV4 steering column has a little bit wider range of motion. Quite logically, since the Eclipse Cross is one of the smallest entries in this segment, we have less combined legroom than we find in the RAV4, but sitting right here behind myself, I still have about 2 to 3 inches left. Overall combined legroom is about 1 inch behind the last generation Ford Escape and about 2 inches behind the RAV4. Rear seat headroom also falls a little bit behind the rest of the competition. This model does have the dual pane moonroof right here, and that does reduce headroom a little bit, but I still have about ½ an inch left. So the 73.2 inches that we find back here, although notably less than the RAV4, is still fairly comfortable for an adult. Overall width is definitely going to be a little bit narrower than we see in the RAV4, so that means trying to combine 3 children or 3 adults across the back seat, or especially adults and child seats, it's going to be a little bit trickier in the Eclipse Cross than the RAV4. As you'd expect out of a modern crossover, both vehicles feature 60/40 folding rear seats. Both vehicles feature rear seat recline mechanisms. We get a little bit more motion in the Eclipse Cross than in the RAV4, but if I move this Eclipse Cross rear seat all the way back, then my head is definitely touching a portion of the ceiling because of the way that the roof line is overall shaped. When it comes to cargo capacity, we have 37.6 cubic feet of storage space back here in the RAV4 and a power tailgate hatch. That was good for 6 bags in our 24-inch roller bag score. Over here in the Eclipse Cross, we find a manual hatch and 22.6 cubic feet of storage space. That storage space is definitely due to this rakish profile right there in the back. Obviously, the Eclipse Cross is a very style-forward crossover, as I said earlier, and that means that we get less cargo capacity on the inside. Just 4 bags in our 24-inch roller bag score. Meanwhile, in the RAV4, thanks to the greater length of the vehicle, we can fit something that's 5 inches longer than we could in that Mazda. Both vehicles have temporary spare tires standard. In the RAV4, however, we have enough room to put a full-size spare tire if we wanted to, and over here in the Eclipse Cross, we just don't. In fact, in the Eclipse Cross, it definitely looks like this was designed in other world markets to not have a spare tire at all, because if the load floor is down, you'll notice that we have a little bit of extra storage space all the way on each side, and that load floor could be a little bit lower. That's likely because in other markets, it doesn't have a spare tire at all. On the inside, the Mitsubishi is definitely very black heavy. We have a lot of soft touch materials going on in both cabins, a soft touch upper section of the dashboard. We have a somewhat small glove compartment on both vehicles, but the Mitsubishi does give us a slot right there where we can put the instruction manual separate from that storage bin. In the center of the dash, both vehicles have touchscreen infotainment systems. The screen here in the Mitsubishi is a little bit smaller than in the RAV4, but this does feature Android Auto integration for 2019, and we don't see that until 2020 in the RAV4. We have touch buttons only in the Eclipse Cross, more physical buttons going on in the Toyota, and the overall software interface that is native to the vehicle is perhaps a little bit more basic here in the Mitsubishi than in the Toyota. Continuing down the console, we have 2 air vents right here. We then have a 2-zone automatic climate control in both vehicles. The controls are a little bit more traditional here in the Eclipse Cross. Because the Eclipse is a little bit narrower in terms of overall vehicle size, things are a little bit more crowded. So the start-stop button positioned right there behind the steering wheel is a little bit more awkward to use than in the Toyota, and the buttons are a little bit harder to get to right here in the center console. We have a heated steering wheel button, an eco mode button, pretty traditional console shifter right there, a button to lock the center coupling in the all-wheel drive system, the controls for the heated seats, and then a touchscreen controller for the infotainment system. Mitsubishi allows you to choose which input method you prefer. You can use this touchpad very much like we see in modern Lexus vehicles to interact with the infotainment system, or you can just touch the screen. Then behind that we have two decently sized cup holders and the controls for the electric parking brake and the auto brake hold system. And then continuing even further back from that, we have a center console with a reasonable amount of storage. It has a softly padded armrest topper. Both vehicles feature analog instrument clusters with a small color LCD right in the middle. When we move out from there, we find shift paddles on the Mitsubishi's steering column. They don't move with the steering wheel. That's definitely the preference of some professionals out there. And these are absolutely gorgeous metal shift paddles. These are some of the best shift paddles you'll find in any vehicle out there. Moving out from there even further, the steering wheel is not quite as attractive as the steering wheel that we find in the Toyota, however. Both vehicles feature adaptive cruise control and controls for the infotainment system on the steering wheel. A feature that we don't see available in the Toyota is this pop-up heads-up display. This is very similar to what we see in certain modern Mini models as well as some Hyundai models. The image is projected on this sheet of plastic that is right there between the driver and the windshield itself. Heads-up displays done this way are not quite as useful as the ones that project on the windshield, but they are an awful lot less expensive. As you'd expect with less power under the hood, the win in acceleration goes to the RAV4 Hybrid. 7.5 seconds 0 to 60 in our tests versus 8.9 in this Eclipse Cross. But I have to say that I really like the turbocharged and CVT combination in the Eclipse. If you're going to have a vehicle with relatively little horsepower, and about 160 horsepower is not a great deal for a compact crossover these days, then the CVT and the turbocharger are a relatively good combination. Because this engine doesn't have to rev as high to give you the acceleration that we see in alternatives like an HR-V, the next category down, with even smaller engines. Those really have to rev an awful lot to climb hills like this. And the 1.5 liter turbo allows this vehicle to climb the hill loafing at around 1800, 2000 RPM or so. So even though this is certainly not as quick as the RAV4 Hybrid, in daily driving this is still perfectly livable. It feels a little bit punchier than it really is. When it comes to the braking score, the lighter curb weight definitely pays dividends for the Eclipse Cross. This stopped in 123 feet versus 131 feet for the RAV4 Hybrid. Even the regular RAV4 is a little on the long side in terms of overall braking distance. 8 feet may not sound like a great deal, but remember that that is half a car length. So depending on what you're doing, that could be the difference between rear-ending the car in front of you and completely avoiding it. One thing worth noting when comparing a non-hybrid to a hybrid is that the RAV4's brake pedal is a little bit unusual versus a non-hybrid vehicle. Tractions between friction braking and regenerative braking or going the reverse direction just are not as smooth in the RAV4 Hybrid as we see in some competitive hybrids, or of course non-hybrids like this Eclipse Cross. When it comes to overall handling ability, Toyota's done a really good job with the new RAV4, and I give that an A- still. Over here in the Eclipse Cross, I had given this a B-, but I'm going to raise that up to a B because back to back, the Eclipse Cross definitely feels smaller, it feels a little bit more nimble. On the other hand, the steering is pretty numb, so it's a little bit more difficult to tell exactly what the front tires are doing. And it's worth noting that even though the Eclipse Cross is a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter, it's not really going to grip the road any better than the RAV4 Hybrid. The last time I drove the Eclipse Cross, I gave it a C+ when it came to the overall ride score, but I have to revise that a little bit and give this now a B- when it comes to the ride, because the RAV4 is about as firm as this vehicle is. The shorter wheelbase that we see in the Eclipse Cross definitely means that we get a little bit more of a bobblehead feeling in here than we see in some of the larger crossovers in this segment, but overall this handles a rougher road like the gravel road that we're on pretty well. If you're planning on taking your compact crossover off the beaten path a little bit, again, we have very similar ground clearance in the RAV4 and the Eclipse Cross, and overall off-road ability is pretty similar as well. We have the ability to put this into either auto, snow, or gravel mode. The gravel mode appears to effectively lock the center coupling. Those drive modes are pretty similar to what we see in the rest of the competition, including the regular non-hybrid versions of the RAV4. Remember that when we're talking about the hybrid RAV4, however, that we do not have a mechanical all-wheel drive system. We have an electric motor in the rear, and that can send up to about 90 pound-feet of torque or so, about 50 horsepower or so to the rear axle. So that means that depending on the situation that you're in, if you're driving at low speeds out on a gravel road, it can more or less balance power front to rear depending on the state of the battery charge. But at higher speeds, the rear axle is not really going to be doing much for you. That's going to be more noticeable out on regular road surfaces in the snow, or if you do plan on taking your vehicle into deep sand or something along those lines, the hybrid system is not going to be quite as capable as a traditional mechanical all-wheel drive system. Back out here on the paved road, we definitely feel a little bit more tossed around in the bumps in the corners in the Eclipse Cross, and the suspension does get a little bit more upset than the RAV4s on uneven pavement. If I were going to choose one of these vehicles for a long road trip, my money would definitely be on the RAV4. But on the other hand, there are definite advantages for the smaller size of the Eclipse Cross. This is definitely going to fit in places that the RAV4 simply wouldn't fit. It's a little bit shorter overall, and it's a little bit narrower overall also. So it means it's going to fit a little bit more easily in some of those tight parking spots. In cabin noise, we got 72 decibels in the RAV4, 73 decibels here in the Eclipse Cross. They're honestly pretty even. Both vehicles have a decent amount of engine noise in the cabin if you're accelerating hard, but out on the open highway, they're relatively similar. The Eclipse Cross gives us a little bit more wind noise, a little bit less road noise, whereas the RAV4 gives us a little bit more road noise and a little bit less wind noise. Both the Eclipse and the RAV4 exceeded their EPA fuel economy estimates. We've been getting just over 40 miles per gallon in the RAV4 Hybrid. In our long-term driving cycle, where we've had 7 different people driving the vehicle for about 2,100 miles total now, that fuel economy average has dropped down to just below the EPA average, right around 38.8, 39 miles per gallon. Meanwhile, in the Eclipse Cross, on the same driving cycle that got us over 40 miles per gallon in the RAV4, we've been getting about 28.5 miles per gallon, which is notably better than the EPA score for the all-wheel drive model. So as far as over or underperforming EPA cycles go, both of these vehicles get A+, but clearly the fuel economy is going to be better in the RAV4. Out on the open highway on longer road trips, there's not going to be a huge difference between the Toyota and the Mitsubishi, but in and around town in your average daily driving cycle, the Mitsubishi is definitely going to fall behind the RAV4 because it's not a hybrid. That real-world efficiency is definitely due to the 1.5-liter turbo and the CVT. We see something very similar going on in the Honda CR-V, which also uses a CVT and a 1.5-liter turbo. Overall, out on the road, the RAV4 definitely comes across as the more grown-up alternative here, but there's still some solid reasons that you might want to consider the Mitsubishi. This does feel a little bit smaller, a little bit tidier, even though it doesn't necessarily handle better than the RAV4. We also, again, get some of those features that we don't see in the RAV4, like that heads-up display right in front of me. Both vehicles definitely fall into the easy to live with category, and this Eclipse Cross here is significantly more modern feeling than the Mitsubishi Outlander. As I said at the beginning of the video, the Eclipse Cross is priced very similarly to other compact crossovers. So this is solidly in the same category as the RAV4. What do we mean by that? Well, this starts at $22,845. That is notably less than the RAV4, about $3,000 less. But if you add all-wheel drive to this, it ends up just $50 less than a Subaru Forester. Unquestionably a direct RAV4 competitor at $24,445. Again, the Forester just $50 more than this. The Mitsubishi does come with a long powertrain warranty, 10 years, 100,000 miles, and a long warranty generally compared to the average in this segment. But again, most notably, considerably less expensive than the Toyota here. $3,000 less than the base RAV4, $6,000 less if you're going to try and take a look at something like this hybrid model right here. So while the hybrid will unquestionably save you money in the long run in terms of overall fuel economy, it's going to take you a very long time to save $6,000 worth of gasoline. And of course, if you want to add all-wheel drive to your base RAV4, that's going to bump that delta up even further. The hybrid model is, of course, standard with all-wheel drive. Perhaps it's because I always seem to have a soft spot for the underdog, but I like the way the Eclipse Cross is styled overall. It definitely is a little bit more adventurous, more style-forward than the average compact crossover in America. Something like the Toyota RAV4, the Honda CR-V, the Tucson, even the new Ford Escape, they just don't have adventurous styling. They're relatively safe, relatively sedate. Perhaps some might even say boring. Even this new, more exciting-looking RAV4 comes across as a relatively sedate vehicle in terms of overall styling, whereas the Mitsubishi definitely has a few more controversial styling cues, and that's something that I actually appreciate in the Mitsubishi. In addition to that, the Mitsubishi, for the same price as this RAV4, has a few more features on the inside that we don't see in this particular vehicle. Again, the 360-degree camera, the pop-up heads-up display, etc. Which vehicle is right for you will really come down to how you feel about the overall styling of each vehicle and how much you care about initial acquisition costs versus long-term operation costs. Because the Eclipse Cross isn't as efficient as this RAV4 Hybrid over here, or even as the regular RAV4, it will cost you a little bit more to keep around. However, if you're comparing it against the non-hybrid RAV4, then the delta is going to be fairly small. And at that point in time, the Eclipse Cross is probably going to be less expensive overall, even for a 10-year, 100,000-mile ownership cycle. We also see something similar with the RAV4 Hybrid. Because the RAV4 Hybrid is so much more expensive than the Eclipse Cross, it's going to take you about 10 years to start saving money versus the Mitsubishi right over there. Now things get a little bit trickier for the Mitsubishi if we start talking about top-end models or mid-price trims, because again, these two vehicles are pretty similarly priced. $32,000 for this model right here, about $33,000, $34,000 for this hybrid right over here, depending on the exact options that you choose, but we get more content on the inside of the Mitsubishi. We have that heads-up display, the 360-degree camera, leather upholstery, etc., things that we don't see in this RAV4. So the overall value proposition is definitely in place for the Mitsubishi. Now, if my own money were on the line, I suspect I would still get this RAV4 Hybrid over the Mitsubishi. I prefer the way this drives out on the road. It is notably faster and more powerful, and we have that higher fuel economy. And depending on where you live, that could result in a yearly fuel savings of up to about $800 a year versus the Eclipse Cross or the average compact crossover in America. When comparing these two vehicles, something really to keep in mind is the fact that the RAV4 is not going to have as aggressive a deal at the dealer as the Mitsubishi over here. So on the lot, the Mitsubishi could be well more than $6,000 less expensive than a RAV4 Hybrid, well more than $3,000 less expensive than the regular RAV4. RAV4s have lately been transacting at MSRP or above, and the Eclipse Cross has been transacting a little bit below, and Mitsubishi has a lot of really low interest rate financing options as well. Definitely things to keep in mind. So the Mitsubishi Eclipse Cross definitely puts up a good fight, but again, if I were to use my own money in this segment, I would get the RAV4 Hybrid right here. Be sure and let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and what would you get if you were shopping in this segment for around $30,000, especially between the $25,000 and $30,000 mark. Would you get something like this RAV4 over here? Would you get the Eclipse Cross? Which version of each of these would you get? Let me know down there in the comment section below. Be sure and find us over at facebook.com/AlexNautos, and be sure and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already done so you can see all of our RAV4 versus all the other crossovers out there videos. I'll see you all later.